I'd like to pick up on your point about what's been exposed about inequalities
Mm,
by the virus. We talked about, or others have talked about the virus, the disruption, the interruption as being revelation, as being apocalypsis, that sense of something being unveiled.
mm.
And you've touched on some of those aspects of that already, Ruth. But I wonder what have you noticed being unveiled or being brought to more clarity?
Yeah, I think a lot of things that have always been or have for a long time been true are just more obvious and more sort of in your face. I mean, from the really obvious inequalities of wealth and whether people can feed themselves. Um, that's very obvious. I think some of the continuing inequalities around gendered division of labour in the home have been really noticeable.
Yeah.
And I think massively race has become like racial inequality just in the deaths that we're seeing from the virus, particularly among healthcare workers and other key workers, and just the sort of the obviousness of how kind of stratified our economy and our society is by race and by class in
Mm.
terms of who is on the one hand really really key and keeping the food on the shelves, but on the other hand kind of a little bit seen as expendable and worth risking.
Yeah.
um, and I think that for me that paradox of these are the people who we can't live without,
Mm.
but also these are the people who we don't value enough to protect,
Yeah.
has been really, that's always been true.
Yeah.
It's just more obvious now. um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
the speed with which we've gone from rhetoric around low skilled to rhetoric around key workers, and we're talking
Mm.
about the same people very often.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And that's been quite remarkable to see that shift, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And I guess one of the wonderings is how deeply that lodges in the public imagination, in
Yeah.
the public discourse,
Yeah.
and how actually the temporary unveiling of some of our eyes in crises like this, how they become more permanent,
Yeah.
how we don't slip back into obliviousness.
Yeah. And I think a really important part of that is just naming it and
Yeah.
saying out loud, this is what's happening.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and this is what has always been happening, but now we're
mm.
seeing it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I think alongside that, there's been a sense of not just being aware of certain people groups that have uh, been undervalued, been overlooked, are currently and always more at risk, but also actually exposing our connections to each other, exposing our sense of connectedness and independence on each other. I think I've been fascinated by the language over the last little while. Um, Someone wrote an article last week reflecting on how the first stage of government response treated us as subjects. The government told us what
mm,
to do, and most of us willingly did it. Um, the second stage has kind of shifted more to the language of the consumer.
mm,
If you can do this, but we need
mm,
to make some choices. You need to make some choices. It's all about the decisions that you make, and that glosses over the fact that some people are more able to make decisions than others. Some people have more choices open to them than others. We can choose to work at home on our laptops in
mhm,
our conservatory in our back garden. Many others of our neighbours don't have any choice but to now have to go to work.
Mm.
But also that there's another possibility of language and thinking about who we are in it all is that actually we're profoundly connected to each other, and profoundly dependent on each other, as well as responsible for each other.
Yeah.
And it feels like our government at the moment don't really have that kind of language in their register in the
Yeah.
vocabulary.
Yeah. I think the sort of the reciprocal interdependence is what has been really noticeable for me. I think a lot of political language in the last little while, well, the last few decades probably, has been about who is dependent on whom, and that somehow dependence is a bad thing.
Yeah.
You know, all the language around benefits and all the language around scrounging and being dependent on the state has been very negative for a very long time. And I think we've somehow allowed that idea that dependence is bad, and that some people depend on other people but not the other way round, to enter the public discourse. And suddenly that's become so clear that that is just not true. But those of us who have an income that is independent of the state are not independent of our neighbours. But you know, we're just not. That's how food gets as far as our house. But it's just become really stark. And all the notions that go with that of being self-made or independent, or, you know, we say it's in figures of speech, isn't it? If someone is of independent means, and there's no such thing. There's no such thing. And I think for me, that ties in a little bit with something that we've touched on a bit around class, and the idea of sort of independent self-sufficiency and getting out and making something of yourself, which is certainly a narrative that I encountered and engaged with a lot when I was a working class teenager, wanting something different from what I saw around myself. The only narrative was, and I think still the only narrative is for a lot of people, you can make something of yourself, you can get out, you can do something different as an individual if you work hard enough and you do well enough and all those things. And I guess kind of the unspoken goal of that is that you become independent of your community. And it's really made me reflect on what a damaging thing that is to be setting up as a goal for young people.
Sure. Absolutely.
You don't. You just become dependent in a different way. And you can't, and you shouldn't be trying to be.
Yeah. And I think one of the joys of this time living on the Fairs in Bromford has been noticing around me how much interdependence is going on here, the expressions of neighbourly care and creativity, people sticking tables outside their houses and inviting people to put food on them for others to help themselves for, you know, just in a sense of sharing what we have so that those who need something can get what they need. You know, an immense resilience and creativity. One of the nans locally going into the beautiful Bluebell Woods and with her grandkids decorating trees, making little fairy houses, bird feeders and the like. And even when they get trashed and burnt and removed, going back again and again and rebuilding, recreating, and even, you know, making it more beautiful and more complex and more widespread than it was before, in a way that, you know, I think all of us who've been wandering through our neighbourhood here in the last few weeks have been touched by, sustained by, you know, are really actually very dependent on being able to do those walks and see those bits of beauty and creativity and resilience, and that's some of the stuff that keeps us going.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, to return to our what has been revealed question, one of the things that I think has been revealed is that there are the gifts that are already present in our neighbourhoods. And and that actually some of that resilience and creativity is perhaps present somewhere like the Firs and Bromford in a way that it isn't somewhere like where I live, where there are big gated houses and you don't see your neighbours. You know, that actually what's being revealed is that there's a gift where you are that is lacking where I am. Whereas I think the prevailing narrative would be that the people who live in these massive houses around here have more, and materially obviously they do, but actually they don't, and they're not, and they're not more independent either, because they are dependent on the people who, I was going to say stack the shelves at Sainsbury's, the people who load the Ocado deliveries. But it's not that same. But actually, I think they're missing out because they're not engaging in that mutual interdependence that you're describing.